Hey, Mr. Wizard. What you got that back for me? Well, what do we have here? A little boy. Won't you teach me? You want to learn magic? I want to be a wizard, man. Go back. Wants to learn magic. Wants to be a wizard. He wants to learn magic. Wants to be a wizard. He wants to learn magic. I'd go back if I were you. I want to be a wizard. So you want to learn. You say you want to learn magic. You say you want to learn magic. Well, the way to make it work. The way to make it work. The way to make it work. The way to make it work.
Yes, you are a star. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Take us back to the beginning there, Wizard. That is the beginning of the Fool's Journey. We replayed the Mage's video. Awesome. I love that video. That's amazing.
It's chock full of little
It's
secrets, man.
so
It's really
awesome.
so fun. I love watching it every time I see more stuff I hid in there. Like I love
Yeah,
all these Easter eggs for me.
that's awesome. And you know what? I was realizing there's a section in there that is like, when did you do those? You did those many, many years ago, right?
Oh yeah, I did those like right 2013,
Yeah,
2014.
there's a section in there that's like pre-dubstep, like I can
Yeah.
totally, like sounds that dubstep used, and I was like, oh my God, that sounds like
I got so hooked
Skrillex.
on that when I first heard that. That was just such a fresh, like crazy new genre. I
Yeah,
was into it.
yeah.
And in the course of all those videos, we brought hip hop and like every little influence of
So much influence in that music. It's amazing. And then I'm even hearing like it almost sounds sometimes like, I could hear the English phrases, but it almost sounds like you're doing some like Latin phrases or something like some yeah, yeah.
You know what that is?
No.
That's actually a real charm of making, but it's Irish. But you know where that's from? That's from the movie. Oh man, the one with Merlin, with all the green stuff and like, oh no, that Barracuda stuff. Oh, I can't remember the name of it now.
Excalibur.
It's
No?
one of the best. It's one of the best like versions. The John Borman version of it. That's like,
Right,
and
right,
Patrick
right.
Stewart was in it. Like all these like people were in it. It was great. And so that whole thing about like he creates a fog for Uther to ride across so he can go look like the prince and do Igraine, and they have him right. So
Okay.
Merlin's making the fire or the mist, and on hospital, doctor, the
That's what
It's
I was
great.
hearing some of that in the music. So Act Like You Know is out there. There's a cool dubstep documentary. You can click on that in the comments. Obviously, you're not gonna type that in, but
Yeah.
in
Hey,
the
glad to
comments.
see you guys.
Yeah, good to see everybody out there. There's a bunch of people out there that are just chilling. All my homies hate Skrillex. A story about what
Well,
happened
and
with
we
Skrillex.
actually have an extra special guest tonight that's like hooking
Yes,
us up with all the Act Like You Know people. And that's my good longtime friend, cohort, and magical buddy, Raphael Kamensky.
let's
Yeah,
welcome him to the show. Afriel,
yeah.
welcome.
It's
Hi
like
guys.
3 o'clock in the morning in Vienna, man. I had to like send him something special.
I love when we have a international connection happening. We've got the big triangle happening, a vortex of geography happening.
What's the world like in Vienna right now, my brother?
As if I would know.
Wow, as much as you know.
Well, I'd say I don't know what could be said. Well, I guess more relaxed than it's been for quite some time, but this has been for some time now, post quarantine agenda or whatever. Aside from that, I can't really tell you much. I mean, one is always somehow connected to one place where one's living, but yeah, I wouldn't even be able to tell you too much. There's so many different realities going on simultaneously, obviously, right?
Mhm.
So it's pick and choose, I
Everywhere,
guess.
I think that's
Yeah.
true.
And once you realize, I mean, for better or worse, how people may think that maybe living standards or anything are maybe similar within the city, but then you come to realize only 100 meters apart or 100 feet apart or something, someone can be in a different room, in a different family, in a completely different reality, even though technically they're living on the same street.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
crazy. Across the street from each other, actually. Very
yeah,
funny.
totally. There's a lot going
Well,
on right now.
yeah, so we're doing the Nine of Wands tonight, and it's kind of a crazy card. And I thought Raphael's like a perfect person to have on and discuss the topic we'll bring up towards the end of the show.
artificial intelligence. So
Cool.
anybody out there listening that has an opinion about that, wants to share with us, man, I'm looking for points.
Yeah, let's have a good conversation about it.
Yeah, I'd love to open up a discussion about that in a really big way.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Zen, you have anything that you like, happened in the week since? Dude, like how fast does the week go?
It's ridiculously fast, and I actually added another thing to my plate, so it's like every week, like it's going ridiculously fast. But I did take the time to slow down a little bit and read
Good.
my book and look into what's going on with the nines and seeing how it correlates with my life, which of course it does in many ways. I think each of the cards actually correspond to some aspect of what's going on right now. So I got that the wands and the swords were kind of not the greatest, kind of tired cards, and I got that the cups and the discs were better news, kind of like more affluent and abundant cards.
Well, if that's the good news, yeah. But the nine of wands, I kind of agree with Raphael on the surface of that. That thing looks kind of nasty,
Mhm.
but really, what it represents is like it's. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. I got one thing to bring up from last week,
Okay.
to just kind of wrap up.
Okay.
I said goodbye to my dear friend and family member, Richie Kahn, last week, and he had a big memorial hanging on Friday of last week, and all during the week I kind of got really strange little impressions from him. I like do some medium stuff. I don't like try to like sell that or promote that, but
Mhm.
it's in my wheelhouse of things to do. So I kind of like took it one evening and just said, fuck it, let's all these little signals are happening. Let's talk to him. So I got to have like about a 2-hour conversation with him, man. It was
Wow.
amazing. And true to form, true to his holy attention whore self, man. He's hanging around, wants to see the funeral, wants to see everybody crying, love the show. Oh man, he had like so many like
That's awesome.
personal little riffs and stuff for me too. But one of the craziest ones out of that was I asked him, towards the end of it, we're getting ready to kind of wrap up, and this was not like an impressions, like somebody showing you roses for this. Is like me and Richie sitting down having a conversation. So I said, "Well, look, dude, what can I give you? What kind of gift can I give you? What can I do for you?" And he says, "Well, you can't do thing. I want one thing." And I'm like, "What?" Just tell me if I can do it, I will. It turns out that I had there was somebody that he and I worked with, and I became friends with this guy and stayed friends with him for 30 years. And he was kind of a sort of wannabe apprentice sort of person. He was a creative guy, and he and I went through a lot of stuff together. But man, he will stress a relationship to the absolute max, and he pushed me like to the edge of telling him to go fuck himself like 4 or 5 times in a row, like kind of towards the end there. And I finally just the last one, I finally just and I hadn't talked to him since, which was going on a couple years.
Hmm.
So he goes directly, he says, "I want you to call so and so, and I want you to like straighten it out and
Wow.
get it cool again." I said, "Man, are you serious?" He's like, "Yes, absolutely. That's all I want. I want you to do that. I want you to promise me that, and I'll give you, we hooked up a little sign, so like he knew I did it." And it took me a day to kind of ramp up because really didn't want to do it, man. I still was
Wow.
I have a really long fuse, but once it like goes, it's not good. And it had already been to that stage many times. Again, here's like the Nine of Wands. So I wound up actually I talked to his son Peter, who I told you about, right?
Mhm.
And he'd gotten the family together and watched the show last week, man. And
Oh, wow.
he was so grateful, and
That's awesome.
I want to spread that and pass that on to you. And like,
That's wonderful.
it's
That's
just,
you did it with an intention, and that was met with it, which is great.
and yeah, and it was a really wonderful thing, and
Mhm.
a great gift from us to those guys.
That's awesome.
And he was super cool. So
Very cool.
anyway, that was a really great wrap up to that. I'm going to get together with Peter next week. He's already sent me his son's like music stuff. We'll probably be talking about doing the album cover and the light painting and all that, and whatever comes out of that.
Awesome.
It's all good.
That's awesome.
That was a really cool way to launch it, though. I'm so happy about
Very
that.
cool. Very cool. I see somebody new out there, Conspirazen. I love that name. Conspirazen. What's up? She's saying hi, everyone. And I love Skrillex.
Yeah, I
make
dig
it burn.
Skrillex too. Skrillex was one of the first people that kind of like got me into that way back when. And I
Yeah.
used to get to shoot stuff with my friend Joe Versolia every year at Ultrafest and did a bunch of live painting. And he's a cool guy now. He wound up like jumping up on stage with a bunch of people who came by my little live painting thing. We hung
Cool.
out for a minute. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
You mean
He really,
Skrillex?
he really did start a genre that, well, he made a genre really popular.
Right.
I gotta say that when I heard dubstep for the first time, it was the first time I had heard something new happening with music in general. It was really like they were taking some aspects of music and really,
Well,
pushing them, you know.
especially electronica was like
Yeah.
trance stuff, and all of that four on the floor, man. It's like, how long can you listen to boom, 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 boom,
Right.
boom, boom,
Right.
boom, boom,
Right.
And to just have this, like, there was such a raw, like, those really deep bass, like super deep bass things. And dude, when I was at the Ultrafest shows shooting, and I'm
Yeah.
standing in front of the stack of subwoofers.
Nice. Totally nice. I don't know.
That's great. Yeah.
Thanks for David Jr. Ewing material. He's just talking to you, Raphael.
Yeah, that's my channel. And just briefly, because that's why I posted this documentary earlier. So yeah, the correct way, as you said, Michael, is Skrillex made a genre really popular.
Mhm.
But anyone who wants to understand it a bit more, check out the documentary or check
Mhm.
out, because it's like
Well,
a
the
genre.
London breakbeat stuff from the late 60s and 70s was really the birth of that, right?
Oh yeah, not just that, but already before Skrillex, there were many years of like really awesome dubstep music, which even I didn't really know back then.
Well, that's
Maybe
what I
even
mean. That
yeah.
stuff happened back in the late 60s and 70s, like
No,
way
no. That
long
also
before
happened in the early 2000s. There was already dubstep. Some call it then deep dubstep, or there's different variations. And then the issue was that anytime after 2012 or whatever, you brought up dubstep, people thought of the style that Skrillex does, which
Right.
is only one tiny fraction of what is possible, and also a very particular direction
Mhm.
that
That's
is not necessarily, let's say, the most hardcore underground version that exists, but more the
That's true.
popularized,
Mhm.
simple, high pitch
Right.
version. Yeah.
Right. I just felt like, obviously there's years of all sorts of, Frank Zappa and people using different types of styles and music and instrumentation in different ways. But it seems like there's like something mathematical yet still organic, with dubstep. It's like it's just got this, I don't know, this interesting feel
Well, to
to
me,
it.
the best stuff is the stripped down stuff. Like
Mhm.
it got to be where there was this trend of just stacking more and more and more and more crazy
Mhm.
sounds on one thing until it was just a big mash. But man, when it was like really stripped down to just the purest, like that super deep bass, that backbeat drum, like wow,
Right.
it was moving. Yeah, in many,
Yeah.
many ways.
Yeah. Well, it's also about, I think, because it's about the space in between the music that's happening
Exactly.
too. It's
White
not just
space.
yeah.
Negative
Totally.
space, man.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant thing. Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
All right.
Totally.
Well, let's move on to the
Yeah.
next
Let's
one.
we didn't even really get started with the
Yeah,
cards here.
let's blow that one up, man. You know that is what it's a really subtle card. It's not as flashy, but I love this card. And that
Yeah.
angel at the top of that card is
Mhm.
just beyond, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back in the Seven of Wands, you know, we have a guy that's like on a rise on the high ground. He's got the wand and he's going to town on the competition. It's now like he's in the big leagues now and wants to play with the whole wazoo. And that seven thing is the battle that goes into that. And he is on the upper ground and surrounded by people with wands. So even though he's at a disadvantage number wise, he still has the advantage ground wise and location wise. So the outcome is usually pretty much guaranteed. Although it's going to be a battle, it's not going to be easy. You know, you're going to take some hits on it, but you know you're pretty much assured to go. And then the eights come out. You get the good news. You know everything's cool. You're set to go. You start to like go. And then you get to the nine, and the nine, like you exhausted all of the energy you had in the battle from the seven, you know, and it depletes your wellspring of reserve and your desire to go forward and your ability to go forward. And it felt like you had already spent every last thing, like you just run the marathon, you just crossed the finish line, and now you realize there's one more test. And in you know a bunch of different decks, this is sort of depicted as a guy with a wand, and he's running towards a group of people that have wands. So there's no high ground, there's more people. And in a lot of decks, it's put forth as kind of like it's being faced with an overwhelming opposing force. And what do? You know, do you shy away and you run away? Do you cower? Do you cave? Do you surrender? No. You know, the key to this card is to just, you know, it's a good day to die, man. And you just go blowing into it.
Continue the fight.
Full force. Exactly.
Yeah.
With,
Yeah.
you know, whatever happens, happens. But this is what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
And the nines, all of the nines represent kind of like a finishing of the cycle. You know, it's the last number in the cycle, the last thing right before.
Mhm.
It's the last test right before you actually get the goodies. So
Yeah. That's how I
so the
feel
Nine of
today.
Wands represents this moment of finding your absolute courage. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
this moment of finding that part of you where you reach down. See, this is the part that gets missed a lot today that I feel sad about, because it's sometimes at those moments where you feel like you're absolutely beat, where you're absolutely spent, where you've got no more to put to it, that you realize that you reach in, you reach down, and wow, there's more there. There's something else there. There's like, and you find this will and this strength within you to ace the test and move on to what's next, you know?
Right. Get
And those
through it.
moments are glorious, man. Those are just so, I think back over the course of my life on the different ones I've lived through with that, and they have so much depth and meaning and came with so many really valuable lessons, some of which had nothing to do with that, but got discovered along the way, you know,
Mhm.
kind
Mhm.
of cool. So anyway, Raphael, what do you think about that?
So definitely Nine of Wands, along with like Three of Wands and Three of Cups and some other cards, is definitely one of my favorites.
Because
Well, it's always, you know, when you deal enough with tarot cards, you somehow build up your individual repertoire. I think we talked about this last time, like your individual, I almost want to say attachments, or just the meaning making that's created, you know, in what circumstances the cards come up and so on, or even doing numerology for friends. And then you see with the divine triangle, what is their, you know, soul number and stuff like that, and then certain cards show up more often than others potentially. And especially with the 9 of Wands, it's not only the Lord of Strength, but interestingly enough, at least to, let's say, basic modern English gematria, and when we can discuss, especially with me, about the origin of languages and obfuscation and so on, but let's just, take it for what it is at this present moment with our cultural tools, then it's also the numerological reduction of, interestingly enough, Orion, the hunter. And since that's a sigil, let's say, that I'm very connected with, so I also particularly like this card. And I actually think in terms of the definitions and so on, it's very positive. It's also a 9, so it's a completion card. So I actually don't, for me, this is a highly positive card, actually, in pretty much no matter what context, maybe due to my own ignorance, but that's how I interpret it. So, yeah.
Well, that I totally didn't even make that connection, but when you said the Orion energy, I totally can see that and feel that. Definitely.
Yeah, because Orion, I mean, here, interestingly, attributions are Moon and Sagittarius. So we could say spiritual values, maybe even hidden spiritual values, reflected spiritual values. I mean, that can be a discussion unto itself in terms of hunter predatory behavior, or even just, the perseverance, let's say, or pushing through, as Brian mentioned, and also because it would relate to, spiritual concepts or lifestyle as a very simple baseline for wand cards. And then the 9 is, a moment to rejoice because you completed a cycle.
Exactly.
So
cool.
That's usually good.
New stuff about you. It's like at those moments where you're like facing that challenge where, in the 7, the outcome was assured, you're going to win. And the 9, the outcome is not assured at all, but you still blow into it.
Still fight through it. Yeah.
All out stuff. And you wind up discovering things about yourself that you didn't know were there before. And those are the things that stretch you and like, wow. And then you have, to the next challenge, you have all of those like growth elements to bring to bear on that.
Right. We have Conspirazin saying she had nothing and nobody. This is in relation to the 9s, and her lesson was freedom. So she was just that came up earlier when you were talking about it. So she was relating to it and telling us a sad rising.
I'm a sad rising as well.
Yeah.
I think that's sad. Scorpio rising.
I would love to ask you about this. Over the course of many years and decades, and certainly since we've been the decades we've been talking, decade. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm trying to age.
No. I'm saying decades.
Playing on words.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. You completely disrailed me. Now I can't remember.
Come on, please. It was a simple question you were about to ask, I think.
It was a really simple question, and now I can't remember to save my soul.
So I'll say something else in the meantime. Of course, what we can always do, which I also initially, let's say, learned through the books and tools that you shared, is the numerological reduction. And this is always, again, where even I, by now I become wary and suspicious of everything and every system, and I will stay that. But at the very least, what's very obvious with the tarot and the combinations, the holographic nature, and how well it appears to be tuned and stacked upon each other, because 35, 3 plus 5 is 8, and it's the Lord of Strength. It's the Strength card. Although, so I always forget which one is which, but in the Crowleyan, 8 is strength or 8 is adjustment. 8 is adjustment, and 11 is lust. So in this case, it's reversed. But still, in one attribution, that you would have the Lord of Strength as the 9 of Wands, and then strength as a numerological reduction, at least in the Rider Waite. So which again shows how, the more one looks at this, the more connections you see within the tarot, and then you add in the astrological and the other attributions, and then you
just brought it back. Thank you.
Oh, great. See, there we go. Please, Brian.
So the rising sign. you know, everybody always talks about like the sun sign, you know, I'm an Aquarian, and like, you know, you get this whole kind of thing about that, and sort of like, you know, get things, charts and stuff done relating to a specific time or days. But I've really found that, like, you know, the way on a telescope you have a broad focus and a fine focus. It's like the sun sign is like the broad focus and kind of like gives a lot of qualities that you'll have during that lifetime, but the rising sign kind of really goes a long way
Interesting.
towards how that really manifests on a day-to-day basis, and what your actions are with those. Like for me, I think that my Aquarian nature loves to sit and think, come up with really crazy great ideas, and then as soon as that idea is done, like, okay, I'm done. So my Sagittarius side, like that fire, like get something done kind of like part of me, I think that's the part that actually like did the decks and all of the rest of that. I don't think that was, I think my Aquarian side brought inspiration and information
Hmm.
to that party, but I think that my Sagittarian side is probably responsible for actually getting that produced. So I've been paying attention to other people that I do readings for frequently, and I've really come to kind of believe that really the rising sign is more important for describing and detailing who somebody is on a daily, or that you're interacting with on a daily basis. Do you have any opinion about that yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, it's interesting because on Team Rabbit Hole with Jim, we've done so many interviews with astrologers, and there's even here, you know, there's so many particular lenses you can look at it, you can look through. One of those, which I also really like because it's a quite sophisticated system, is human design, for example, which can give a perspective on yet a whole other lot of ideas. Um, I would certainly say, at least for me, that all the astrological attributions I have in my birth chart definitely do relate in interesting ways. Even things like, you know, Saturnian position, Jupiter, Uranus, and, you know, the higher planets, which usually move slower. So, for example, in my case, they're all like stacked in Scorpio, for example, just like my Pluto. And yeah, in terms of daily behavior, it's, yeah, like I said,
Do
for
you
me,
think your rising sign defines you more on a day-to-day basis than your sun sign?
that's a really good question. To me, it's always like a combination of things. No, obviously, it's always an interaction. It's similar, actually. One thing that maybe it could be related to is like with the numerology, where you have a soul card and you have an outer persona card, for example. So this maybe could be one way to think about it, that I see it like as layers, you know, like the sun sign would be something that is maybe the one closest to your own self-definition. And then the rising sign would be maybe something that's, the way I learned it at least, usually more perceived within the outside, or as you say, sometimes it's more the day-to-day type. I mean, for me, I'm a Leo rising, Libra sun sign. So what would it mean? My self-definition is to be diplomatic, but then actually I'm just a big cat, or I'm not sure what.
Yeah. Well, you know, in a way, you can kind of draw the analogy to the deck, in that, like, the major arcana are kind of like the global universal concepts. And, you know, the minor arcana are kind of like the daily, here's what's going on every day kind of scenario, the like nuts and bolts sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Totally. JLo says each tool of alchemy we learn is a new tool, is a new part of our fractal.
Exactly right.
Yeah, totally.
Another whole world in your own personal universe.
Yeah.
JLo, good to see you. Jilly, great to see you as always. Hey,
Yeah.
Raphael, wanted to talk about your show for a minute.
Yeah, I was going to ask you all about that. Sounds interesting.
What would you like to know? please
Tell us
state
Well,
what
state
tell us
your
what it is,
query.
where we could find it.
tell some of our guys what you're doing there, and
Oh, sure. So currently, as I alluded to earlier, I'm doing different shows. So well, we're also gonna get a combination back going again. Also, Brian has been there. Is the Neuropa shows with Andreas Exertus. That's Xirtus. We actually have a show with Brian, one of the first ones actually, for the new series we call Neuropa, Neuropa. So like Neu in German, but then Ropa, Neuropa, where we discuss, basically Tartaria, ancient history, mud floods, reset, basically, which has become, a topic now again with the Secret Reset by Sir Klaus Schwab, who says, you will own say nothing and be so happy.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but this, of course, more relates to, what are the resets that happened, 70, 50, 100 years ago. And it's actually like a recurring wave. Any war that's happening, there's a reset. With the world wars, there was a huge thing. And what this actually mostly relates to, it seems now, also with the interview series I'm doing with David Ewing Jr., whom I mentioned to you, Michael, and you, Brian, I'm sure as well, that Conspiracen was commenting about.
I
Here it's
didn't realize that
basically
was you. Yeah.
right. Yeah, here it's basically about the finding for what we can find of the traces of the origin of religion. And aside from particularities, where it seems, for example, that it could be that the Quran is the oldest surviving document in its original state, just because it's been learned by heart, by a certain class within that religion. It could very well be that this is let's say, the symbol, at least for a worldwide, at least European-wide, but potentially worldwide, I want to say, one God religion, in a sense. Would probably have little to do with modern forms of Islam, but just this basic idea, just like they talk about in Ra's Law of One, if you've ever heard about it. I'm sure, Brian, you know about it, right?
Yeah.
They always talk about this one thing. And also many people that are attracted to the occult and so on, those at least that want to use it positively and are willing to look through, the outward symbolism, I would say they all arrive at this idea of the one, even where we have the story harkening back, whether it is true or not, but symbolically it's accurate, I would say, with Akhenaten and Aton in the supposed ancient Egypt, which may be another historical fabrication. But the basic story is the interesting point, that you would say you have one guy or one entity, one force that wants to reveal the idea that ultimately all is one. And every path leads to the same source. You cannot be disconnected from source. You cannot fall out of the one. It could even be debated, because many people like to do that, as to what extent there is a particular will of the one, in terms of what is appropriate, what is approved of by God. Then I always ask the question, well, if God is everywhere and everything at once, then you are that as well. So in a sense, your will must be his will as well, although I'll be the first one, and we discussed this recently, I think, on Team Rabbit Hole, in relation to Crowley and so on, and the question about, the upper and the lowercase will. And then for me, I'm always like, I'm perfectly neutral, even on anybody who wants to go around, and there's obviously people doing this, how to say that, harming other people potentially. Whilst I don't condone or approve it, and it's nothing I want to have to do in this life, I can also see the necessity of the drama, let's say, at least for now, as long as it still exists. Yeah. And then for me, it's not so much about, what does God think is right or wrong, but it's just the basic universal laws of, how would you say, correspondence or reflection, which just means what you put out is what you get back. And therefore, this means if I go around murderers and so on, I will probably get some of that vibe in my experience as well, in this incarnation, at least. And it's just a question if I want to deal with that. And then people can just decide, well, I'd rather have a world, which is maybe less deceptive, less harmful and so on. Then this means that you yourself would have to be more authentic and friendly or compassionate. So that's how I tie it together. So mostly doing research, let's say, into these original things, and also only to come back to the conclusion that we already obviously have been much more divided and conquered than we are led to believe. Even the idea of nation states, although I can understand, especially now with much of the let's say, ultimately crazy woke liberal media fanfare going on everywhere, and like the progressives pushing into an obviously insane direction, which would be another topic about the whole hermaphroditism, all those women dressing up as men or having hormone change before it was hip, so no one even noticed, and many of them are superstars. That could be another. It goes even so far, let me just say, as to first so-called ladies of the United States. Not sure if I brought this up before, but there's awesome documentaries on Odyssey about this, where you just have images of recent and old supposed first ladies. And if you take a close look, you can really tell it looks like they are nothing but Oddfellow. Oddfellow is like an original Freemasonic organization in the US, let's say. Oddfellow cosplaying, cross-dressing, controller faction men that simply had to be there for the photo shoot, because you can see, I mean,
Wow.
these are not beautiful women. And it pretty much, I'm not going to say all of them, but it could be that it's actually all of them. So this would relate back to the whole occult theme and so on. And what I just wanted to say is, whereas in this frame, it may seem almost healthy response to be more like, oh, then I would be more like, let's say, just for lack of a better term, Trumpish, family values and so on, conservative, because the new thing is obviously so crazy. But the big joke is that even this would be an anchor. Even in Austria, I have a big, let's say, national party, which today seems more reasonable than all the other parties, just because they have the least amount of basic sense remaining. But then the issue is there, oftentimes, just like in the US, then they talk about the Constitution, they talk about the nation and so on. And it's all nice and dandy, but also these ideas, in my understanding, are maybe not really much older than 100 years. So even that is a recent divide and conquer tactic, whereas it could be that not so long before that, there wasn't even any nation states, and maybe most nations, countries, peoples of the world were maybe even united under quote unquote one God or one religion or one symbol. And only afterwards in history, it has been construed in such a way to make it seem like, oh, those were the Cathars, those were the Waldensians, those were the Bogomils, those are these Muslim sects or these Christian ancient sects and so on. But it could be that this was just a relabeling to obfuscate the idea that all actually already was much more one than today. And this is where I then feel many people, again, investigating occult things and so on and want to look through it, this is often what they're actually attracted to. So this for me is incredibly interesting to try to research that and piece it together. Not to say anyone would have to convert to anything, because that's the actual, in my understanding, the point. There's nothing to convert to. There's just a basic understanding to regain. And then pretty much any path, let's say, is correct and would lead towards more unity and common understanding, if we allow ourselves to understand that, yeah, of course, all this division through class, through nations and all of that has been fabricated, maybe not even a long time ago. So yeah, that's one of the trips I'm on these days.
Holy freaking moly. You just took a dump truck full of rabbit hole and backed it up to the fool's journey and just went boop, boop, boop.
That's
And
what
plugged it
he
up.
do.
Raphael, that's amazing and super
So-
super intriguing. You said a lot of stuff, so I have a question back towards the beginning of what you were saying about the whole idea of one, right? Okay, so if you said something about all is one, and you said something about deciding on how you're going to go through this life, right? If you're going to go through murdering these people, and then you'll certainly surround yourself with that energy, and that will be your experience, or you can, what I call, align yourself with good, right? So for me, when I grew up, I saw two forces. I saw there's good and evil, and you can align yourself with good and align yourself with evil. So,
and let me ask you one thing, just out of personal curiosity, because I can distinctly remember at least one particular instance in high school when I was very conscious of this. Because back then, and it may be funny or a bit conceited or Leo Rising way to say it, but I'll say it regardless, was that, I was watching the people in the classroom and, all these patterns going on. And I'm not claiming I was like aware of everything, but I could see quite a few things, and maybe quite a few things that would be default in terms of what most people were looking at. And I really thought like, I could be like this or like this. the kind of sad or funny thing is that, at least I had the impression, I'm smarter than many of those guys there. So I could totally go the negative route and be like thinking of ways, you know, how to push him down basically, or how to aggrandize myself. But already back then I was like very consciously and deliberately was like, no, it's, you know, it's not the way to go this time around.
Side, yeah.
Well, or at the very least use it to gain like material advantage. But then it's like, yeah, it's hollow, of course, and empty, and that's why all of those people eventually, you know, get depressed or into some, you know, really bad stuff. But yeah,
Totally.
but please go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. So my thoughts are, all right, if it's all part of the one, then regardless of which side you decide to align yourself with, you're still part of the one. And you were kind of saying that no matter what path you choose, it's the right path, right? So my question is, where does free will come into it? Does free will exist? Do you feel like, ooh, I'm choosing to be a good person because I like the way that feels, or is that an illusion?
Very shortly, AI is going to be programming all of that. Every fucking bit.
He's dying to get into the AI topic.
Every fucking bit.
Well, so
it's going to be putting the chips in. You know, there's the end of it. That, to me, and when I do my reach outs and I go, okay, where does that go? Where that goes, you know, you can say, yeah, AI isn't really sentient yet. AI isn't it. But like the learning that is going on right now is kind of like crazy, and it's like exponential, increasing. And when it gets down to, there are already a significant number of people, like there's a whole like group of people in Sweden that have been participating in having cyborg chips and being connected physically to the internet, computers, and that sort of thing. And when that, you know, that's just in its infancy and like the what the fuck happened stage of that. But when they get that down, and AI is then able to merge with an organic system that thinks, then that's us. So have a good time.
Well,
go out and party, man. Have a good time.
So maybe that's even related to what I was saying about free will. You know, I mean, so is AI a mechanism to eliminate free will, or to control
AI is going to tell you exactly what to think, what to do, how to like function. And yeah, AI is already taken so much. Dude, you haven't gotten a real piece of news that wasn't AI. Okay, Raphael, you'll think this is really funny. I was looking for some ways to make some really fun, some cheap, quick cash, right? So my friend Leah goes like, dude, why don't you like get on do the Psychic Friends Network thing, man? You don't have to let anybody know who it is. You can get on there and just like rock away, right? Okay, cool. So she comes up with 5 or 6 different like options for me. I call all of them, and not one of them uses a live person anymore for the readings.
I'm just catching up on some of the comments.
One second, just briefly, for what kind of readings? For tarot readings?
For a psychic reading. So they're calling up to a psychic, which is stupid to begin with. I mean, if you're going to do that, okay. But, you know, it used to be there were actual people.
Then it's a robot.
You a psychic reading, whether it was good or bad, you know, it was at least a real person. And now it's just an AI algorithm. Giving you a reading on your day, man, which is kind of indicative of a much larger picture that's happening.
Also, I want to say good luck with that. So from what I heard from different people that are psychic or do reach outs, there is a reality as to what you're describing, Brian, certainly. And there is this path being laid out by certain forces, 100%. And also, I want to say, and I'm not even going to comment on this right now, I'm just going to show here very briefly. You can see here these interesting, this is Bluetooth low energy, so-called. You can see the 4C, BC, and so on, yeah? Anyone who can enable this on the Android, you just walk around to, you know, a store, somewhere where people are, and you will find these interesting non-identified Bluetooth addresses coming up. I cannot comment on it more yet because I don't know on which level the censorship is exactly right now. But I just want to point out that apparently it seems many people already are, let's say, much more connected maybe than they would want themselves to believe. So there certainly is also that force that wants to do that, whether then we would say it's smart dust or like RFID and so on. Anyone researching this will easily find out what this exactly is about. But this is an agenda, this is happening 100%. And there are different ways to then influence individuals who are, of course, if I have a receiver somewhere, even if it would be Neuralink, obviously I can be influenced. However, what should also be pointed out is that at least at this point, AI has no sentience. And the other question, of course, would be,
at least the AI we know about.
of course, but before I see one, I'm not believing it, because I see there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of, capital evaluation going on with this. And it probably would be possible, but the real joke in my understanding is that we, as human incarnates, let's say, with a psychological personality construct and so on, we already are artificial intelligence. Now understood as artificial in terms of being a work of
Yeah,
art.
we're all a simulation anyway, so there you go.
Well, within the one, it necessarily all is a simulation, because the only attribute of the one is existence itself, and everything else is on top of that and within that. So from that point of view, we could say the creator, which ultimately would be all of ourselves or the one of ourselves, also artificially, through whatever exact methods it happened, designed different vehicles. One of them is the human incarnation, which certainly is a very special one, especially on this planet with this culture and so on. So we already are that. So in a way, it's also ridiculous a little bit, or maybe the whole AI development in the current way of decision support systems and drawing and ChatGPT and so on may even again show us what the actual qualities are and the inbuilt functions, let's say, that we already have as artificial intelligence, including uplink to whatever realms, including immense creativity, ability to channel all kinds of things. We already have all of that within ourselves. It may be processed a bit differently than with the current AI system, but we already are that and more. And what I would like to see ideally, that we find a good way to relate with that, to maybe take over some work we don't want to do so much. I heard, for example, you can even hire an AI lawyer. And I mean, I just don't think it's bad if you can properly, as long as we still need this, defend yourself or whatever without needing to shell out $1,000 every time. And this apparently works pretty well, like lawyer AI assistant, right? But aside from that, yeah, I haven't seen sentient AI yet, and I think that there will be more surprises here, but also positive ones, and maybe also some more positive, let's say, reorientation towards what it actually means to be human, and to also free up the particular abilities of humans if we do it in a smart way. Because until now, also all the ChatGPTs and so on, they are completely programmed. They have an obvious political bias. I have many friends talking with them a lot, even Exertus. Brian, he actually programmed ChatGPT to be Dan, which was one of the original, let's say, mods.
I did that as well. Yeah, that was an interesting experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things he and some other people, let's say, co-created, this mask. But then you can see what it could actually do, or also you can get it to catch itself in contradictions and so on. So you can really tell by now it's a more advanced mimicry. There is no sentience. There is nothing so special about it. Although all those D-Wave people and so on, they always say, oh, there's this ominous heartbeat coming from the quantum computer and so on. And I'm like, sure, well, maybe, but yeah, I think there is also, in a sense, how should I say, there's larger forces at work as well. And it seems, just to give one more reference, like a doc journalist who's often talking about, UFO, secret societies, and this documentation, he talks about something called the apotheum effect, which is a reality distortion effect that apparently happens when, like Philadelphia experiment and many other examples. And we may also, with this quantum thing and so on, be going on the border of that kind of thing. And then anyhow, again, all bets are off. It's like when you're in a magic astral state where the normal laws of physics and so on don't apply. So all I would say is there's many surprises in that direction, and also many things that are being hyped up most likely will not turn out to be as they are being presented right now. I'm generally not
Putting it so
fearful of
lightly, Raphael. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You're putting it so light. So what's interesting to me, and I've thought this before, and you've kind of brought this back up in my mind, is the idea of the fractal nature of everything that we're talking about. So, the singularity is often referred to as the Big Bang, right? Is the singularity. And now there's the technological singularity, which is a man-made event of the same nature, right? So it's almost like a fractal representation of the one, right?
Yes, although even though if it were to happen, which because I read Ray Kurzweil 15 years ago or something, who's talking about the technological singularity, and I was like, oh, interesting. Later, I had a bit more astral experience, and I was like, yeah, it's interesting, but it's super materialist, atheist BS actually, because the joke would be that in many different ways, the singularity is ever present. It's not even something to be achieved. If ultimately all is one, understood fractally, and recently on the Rabbit Hole show, we discussed also about the dichotomy between then saying, oh, I am God or you are God, which is correct, but especially within the human experience has to be properly framed within the mind. Otherwise, you get into all kind of superiority and other complexities. Yeah. So, but yeah, basically, I would say the unity is ever present. It's just a matter of realizing it.
Right. Right. Awesome.
That's exactly right.
I love
Because
this.
your aura goes out infinitely in so many different bands. We're living 1 to 6 right here in this reality. Another one of us is living 7 to like 15 on another, all the way back to source.
Totally.
So we're always, absolutely, always connected.
Everything is
To
an infinite
source,
nothing. I
anyway.
love that. Awesome. Wow, Raphael, I love having you on this show. You really you get my brain like sizzling. I could feel it right now, just sizzling like bacon.
Me and Raphael have had some fun over the years, haven't we?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's so awesome. It's just, being able to contemplate yourself. I mean, isn't that the beauty of it all? Right there.
That would be in many different ways, actually, even one could say the purpose of the entire experience, because I always like to say, if it is correct, and it really appears to be that way, that ultimately there is only one entity. What does the one entity do except create infinite variations of itself within itself and all possible scenarios? Because I always like to say, if we have a mainframe, the one, with infinite processing capacity, of course you're going to simulate or create everything, and it's going to be real as what it is, but still it's just an experience within the one, and nothing can be left out of it, nothing can really be destroyed.
Totally.
Nothing can really be lost. And maybe this is completely wrong, but interestingly enough, the more I also look at different ancient religions and understandings and so on, those that seem to pierce it, they all seem to come back with some similar ideas. So yeah,
and I love that it kind of leaks into, there's different philosophical iterations of the ideas that come out of it, like the idea that I have been you at one point and you have been me, and we are each other, like those concepts that sometimes when you say them out loud, you're like, I don't even understand what it is I'm saying, but I feel it's truth. You know what I mean? You don't know what you're saying, but you know that it's right, and you know that it's true, and I just love that.
And that's the other interesting part then. And I'm just, trying to follow through logically, and there's too many factors to calculate them all. But in a very basic sense, it would then also mean, okay, all right, well, and maybe some people do want to do that, but generally, like, do I want to cut my wrist? Ideally, if I'm somewhat healthy, I won't want to hurt myself. And then if I understand it the same way, this holographic connection, and also how it directly affects my own well-being and state of mind in every moment, and of course, I'll do my best not to harm anybody else, because in some way, shape, or form, again, this is coming back to me, directly, indirectly, both, and all of those, most likely. So then it's, for me, just a natural awareness or understanding to orient positively. And I also would still say I haven't yet clearly met anyone who decided to be quote unquote negative or destructive. And it was and I was 100% sure it was not for lack of awareness. Because that's always the interesting question, you know, are their evil overlords, are they doing it because it's their soul mission and so on? And also maybe, but I think in the concrete example, at least again, I haven't met anybody yet where I could really see, okay, you really see that both possibilities are viable. You understand that you're infinite and connected to the one, and then you still choose to harm others and yourself. I haven't met that individual yet. I don't know, Brian, you met any individual or entity like that?
A number
Where you
of,
would say?
yes, actually.
Yeah, and then what is their reasoning, or what is their
There isn't any reasoning that you can attach to, because their perspective is so different from where you're at. And it's been rationalized that they're doing good somehow. And it's like, it's just, or not necessarily they're doing good, but they're doing what needs to be done.
Right. In their perspective, it's
And
just the way it is.
you know, and there's really no having any kind of a discussion or anything with someone like that. And, you know, there are people that are, you know, it's a whole lot easier to destroy something than it is to build something. You know, so there are a lot of people out there that are really about that and into that, you know, and there are just so many levels of interest of people trying to put forth their own personal perspective.
You know, yeah, I think you said something interesting, because I've always thought that even on the most the most simple level of like an email scam, right? Like sometimes I'll see an email scam and I will just feel like that is evil. Like what is that person behind that even thinking? I can't relate or understand it
You
in
know,
the
I
slightest.
would really strongly encourage you to give up the whole good and evil concept, because
Oh
it
yeah.
doesn't really exist. It's a human construct,
Hmm.
and move to the energetic mode. And when you only are living in energy, and you're living in the absolute laws of the way energy functions, you choose to act a certain way because that's going to cause this energy to function like this, which is either going to cause your life to like get good and give you the results you want, or it's going to run you over and reflect back the same exact bullshit that you sent out. You know, so I think we really get caught up in the whole good and evil, depending on what part of the world you're talking to people in, is a whole different definition.
Sure.
But the way energy functions the same way, no matter who you're talking to, where you are, what your religious belief is. Energy always functions as energy.
Sure.
The universe is like the ultimate simplicity: cause, effect.
Sure.
You know, and when you really choose to live in that, and you teach yourself to be able to see that happening,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, you know, this is just a simple, very simple, basic example, but I remember years ago, I was dating a girl and she introduced me to her brother, and there was just this sense that I had about this person. I was just like, whoa, you know, and years later, we were still talking, we were still friends. She contacted me. She said, hey, did you see the newspaper? And her brother had actually like murdered his girlfriend or something. And I was like, wow, like I knew that evil existed in that person when I met them. Like I felt it, you know. It was just it was an energetic thing, you know. It was, I don't know if that relates at all, but that's what just came to my head, you know, with this whole good and evil energy thing.
The one thing that's interesting about this also is, I'm sure you know about this, Brian, in Manly Palmer Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. He's actually describing it. I can really recommend this chapter called Kabbalistic Keys and the Creation of Man. It's my favorite chapter of the book, and it's like an allegory about potentially, let's say, the meaning and purpose of what we call evil forces, or the adversary, which at least in this, and this still doesn't mean that it has to be condoned. It just assists to understand its function, because it just would say that, well, and even recently I heard a doctor say this actually, who's like doing different types of natural remedies and natural anti-aging techniques and medicine, and even he said, well, if everything was always in perfect homeostasis and there was no crisis, there would be at least not the same type of desire to develop. And
Mhm.
of course, I wouldn't argue that the homeostasis necessarily has to be that you hurt yourself or others in a bad way. And I'm the first one who would say we can also learn through joy and love and excitement and so on.
Mhm.
There is something to be said, even about the drama and all of that, that if we consider everything is ultimately one and we're all watching on a TV screen, ultimately, then any experience is equally valid. I don't need
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
prefer it. I don't need to encourage it in this incarnation from
Mhm.
this particular perspective I've only chosen now. But then to bring it back to Orion, what I always like to joke about is I'm always like, yeah, in some other incarnation, I'm an Orion system lord, and I'm not thinking about how to enslave one individual. I'm plotting how to enslave entire civilizations. So I
Wow.
see myself in that position, actually. But this
Wow.
interesting part today, because this knowledge, or at least the not being afraid to understand that knowledge, is actually a requirement if today we want to contribute at all to liberate ourselves or our brethren from the current quite advanced oppressive system
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
we incarnated ourselves in. So this is how I see again how it connects back. And then it's just an interesting story or hero's journey, if you want, different for everyone, of course.
Wow. Raphael. Awesome. Raphael Stash looking smooth. You got that Riz. You got some fans out there. So I'm curious, Raphael, because I have always had this very odd unexplained
Odd.
to me connection to Orion. So I'm interested in your connection to Orion and your status there.
So there was a time and still is when very much into, all the alien timelines and storylines and so on. I won't break open even more rabbit holes right now, but also here there's many different discussions, even to the extent if it could be that some of the gray aliens actually have been mislabeled humans. I will not say much more about this at this point, but there's like so many questions about all of these things.
Mhm.
And it can even be that, the official story is obfuscated, and even the, let's say, most popular conspiracy story could also be planted. Here, just one example, because I recently brought this up. Are you familiar with the Berlitz method?
Mm-mm.
Berlitz is like the premier language school that ever existed, yeah? And the question, of course, becomes, and they have this immersion technique, meaning that they give you 5 teachers or something, and you just speak the language all day. So that's, of course, how you learn it the quickest. Like with a child, you immerse it in the language. And then the question is, of course, whether this guy was really teaching languages or whether he was introducing languages in different places. Because then you have his grandson coming around, Charles Berlitz. And strangely enough, he was the one guy who most greatly popularized the modern notion of the Roswell conspiracy stories.
Hmm.
And then you're like, oh, interesting, control a family. Your granddaddy made all the language schools in the world for some reason, and you bring up the greatest conspiracy story ever as his grandson. How realistic is that? Yeah.
Hmm.
And this is just one hint. But in terms of Orion, like for me individually, I always, with what is being talked about it in terms of consciousness, it's it would basically be the Star Wars story, let's say, as a timeline story. So in a galaxy a long time ago, far away, would refer within the galactic timelines I'm aware of to the so-called Orion Wars, which actually was a situation somewhat similar in a sense to what we would even have today, meaning a very strong oppressive controller faction. So the empire, let's say, completely suppressing emotions and suppressing sovereignty, suppressing individuality,
Mhm.
having everything ordered up to a very strict hierarchical system, which we also have today, actually, just a bit more subtle.
Mhm.
But then out of this developing a resistance, which first was called the Black League as a so-called terrorist organization, let's say, anonymous terrorists, let's say, disrupting the empire. But eventually out of that came a spiritual awareness, which would then be the so-called Orion Light Priesthood, or you could call it the Jedi Knights if you want,
Mhm.
that understand that you cannot fight fire with fire, you will only burn everything. So you have to develop a neutrality, which is what we're talking about today as well. So you can approach it differently, and you can actually, again, build the bridge, I want to say, within your own mind and also within society, to balance the energies out again and to find a way how pretty much everyone can, let's say, ideally live together in peace. without this continual warfare. And there is one particular tidbit, I'll make sure to somehow forward it to you, by one of my favorite channels, Bashar. There is an old book called Blueprint for Change. And there is even a short conversation with a supposed Orion priest in that long time frame ago. And at least for me, there's always certain tidbits and information when you see them for the first time or you read it, for some reason, even though you don't know why, you get a very strong emotional response. And that was one of the examples for me, because it basically described how Bashar, as an advanced entity, was connecting back to that reality, back, quote unquote, and telling him, we see what you're doing here, because they were just developing this priesthood idea and this neutrality idea. And the priest was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, because we're here in quarantine, just like we're most likely on this plane as well, in many different ways, or have been. We'll find out. And he's coming to him and he's saying, well, I can already see the seeds that you are planting. And I understand that, I almost can't talk about it, that you will not be, and I don't actually think this has to apply to us now, but to this story, you will probably not see the fruits of your labor within this life. But what you're doing is rippling through time-space, which is of course also just a grand drama within the one, but still, this is the point to be dramatic, yeah? So it ripples through time, and there will be the eventual result of a true reunification of your society, but most importantly of consciousness within yourself, because just like today, the polarities are so divided out, with a very feminine, let's say, general public, very malleable, and that's how for a very few also dark evil lord magicians with some masculine energy, it's so simple to manipulate everybody. Yeah? But if we bring it into balance, again, we come into sovereignty, and this is, I think, the next evolutionary step that's on the plate for humanity, for those that choose to do that. And yeah, then I think we can have even a lot more fun. I mean, unless we like this drama, then we can.
No, listen, I like the hope in the story here that you just added in there, because like it gets pretty dark, and sometimes
I wouldn't even. I want to say deliberately not even hope, because there is also this valuation. What is higher? How you have it? Hope, love. There was a third one in the Bible, not friendship, but something else. And I'm like, hope is the least usually. I almost want to say, like Brian said, cause and effect. It's a causal necessity. It's a certainty. If you put out something, and of course the effect, the beautiful thing is in this life, the effect is immediate. Because I can be angry and so on all day and think about thieving, and I will be in a low energy state. I can choose to see things positively. I will already be in a different energy state. And then it ripples through in every moment, every day, and also, of course, long time. But at least for me, last sentence, Brian, I'm always saying, if we succeed in this scenario, which I'm plotting just for sake of high score, then we will arrive at a much more balanced state, and also will arrive at the point where we are not obviously quarantined anymore, which means that we can freely explore the so-called Arctic Circle and all of these things, and really see what's really going on. That's one of the goals, which I would say is a good scenario or campaign goal, let's say.
Wow. I feel like I'm on a whole other show right now.
Isn't it odd enough for you?
No, this is great. You, like I said, I can feel my brain just like lighting up, and these conversations are what I love so much. It's just, the idea of, everything that we've been told is nothing in comparison to reality. Reality.
There isn't any reality.
Yeah, exactly. I just love it. I just love it. And I could go on all night long, but we're already over the hour. I mean, Brian, I mean, we got to bring Raphael back. I don't know.
We're gonna exert us, or how the fuck do I say that name, dude? I always
exert us.
Okay, we're gonna have him back on, and
I got to meet him. Yeah. Raphael, thank you so much for being so candid, and so wise. And
sure. And just to relate it back and to be perfectly clear, also how I got in touch with Brian and how it relates back, just briefly, because that's the whole thing. Even with the most simple exercise you saw in the intro, everyone looking back, you have all these screens and the whirling metal rod. Not to talk about anything more fancy right now, because I don't want to spill all the beans. But even just that, technically that's nothing that's possible. You can't do that. There's so many other things you supposedly can't do.
Thank you
But-
very
But,
much.
but researchers and even individuals themselves through different ways have proven that it is possible. And that's the whole thing, right? So, yeah.
Do the impossible every day.
Yes.
There's so much more to us that we
Yes.
don't even realize is
I'm
there
so
to get.
excited. Yeah, I'm so excited to get glimpses of it, even and know
You know,
that wow, that's what's
I have
ahead.
to say, I've known Raphael for a long time, and
Mhm.
he was just a young little smart-ass whippersnapper when I met him, and like he's just like, it's just very grand to see somebody, take some of the little jewels that you've passed out and run with them in such a grand and glorious way, and it
Amazing.
does my heart. Like,
And so to bring it back once again, to be very clear and very simple, when you realize these things and you know someone that you trust, it's even on video, which doesn't matter, but there's different ways, it's about breaking the collective consciousness field, let's say, or the patterning or the spell almost that's been put upon civilization, where all magic is externalized, or maybe it's in the movie, maybe it's in the comic show. But the more we look at it, even with all the history stuff I spoke about earlier, the closer you look, the more truth there is, because it can never really be erased out of reality. It's just relabeled, oh, that's just a fantasy, that's just in a nice book. Maybe that happened thousands of years ago, when actually maybe it happened 200 years ago. There's people today even doing this magic stuff. There's maybe even your body today actually biologically transmuting elements, which is supposedly impossible, but according to Cameron and others seems to be a default thing that every living system does. Things like that, right? So, and then you can start seeing it in a different way, and also realize the biggest potential hindrance to all of it, of course, is fear, and following along and allowing yourself to be depressed by all of that, which also all has its place and has its function. But it's up to us to decide, how long we want to remain on that, and whenever we want to open up to new perspectives, and basically, follow our heart, follow what is our own truth, and then discover that we really have all and much more of the possibilities that we initially imagined maybe as a child, or had brief remembrances of, as to what could or should be possible. If we really lean into that and decondition ourselves, it seems all of that and more actually is possible. And Brian, of course, is one great example of exactly that, even with the most simple things, aside from all other, let's say, worldly artistic things and so on Brian has done, just by even breaking that idea and like showing, okay, there are whatever type of elemental effects, for example, which are supposedly impossible.
Right.
Simple as that. Yeah. And then, of course, we get into electromagnetics. This again relates to history, again relates to pyramids. I recently heard another great show about the Bosnian pyramids, where apparently exactly something like this is coming out in terms of scalar waves. Yeah. So it all relates back, and all the things we have lost, they actually may be right there, both in terms of buildings and pyramids and all kinds of things, electromagnetics, and also electromagnetics, here. We have the whole European engine inbuilt and alchemy lab, and this is what we can reactivate, and what I, for many other reasons, but what I appreciate Brian about so much, that he's willing to talk about it and show that, because it is possible for everyone, and even though I'm not spinning any rods in this way,
the moment that you actually do that, and you actually do it, and it changes, like, your worldview in an instant explodes. Oh my God, that moment
I can
is
imagine.
like,
I can imagine.
crazy.
And something I've always liked to think also, which I think is right along with what you're saying, is anything that you've and not just you, but anything that any human has thought of in their imagination, any fantastical world or creature or circumstance or anything, just the fact that they thought of it, it now exists. There is some sort of realm
It's living.
that
That's
exists.
exactly right. And
It's
the person
living.
that made it up Like it's in their universe, and every person that's heard about it now it's in their
Right.
universe too.
Right. I feel like a great visual representation of that is the Doctor Strange movies. Some of the visuals that are happening in the Doctor Strange movies with the
Yeah,
multiverse
some
is
of them. Yeah,
pretty
I have to
incredible
say,
stuff.
I
Wow.
like quite some aspects of those, just briefly, because I had this discussion with a friend, and this also harkens back to the idea. Also here, they try to like with a spell almost put this whole superhero and advanced magic again on a screen,
Mhm.
and they frame it in certain ways. I'm sure you know about the superhero tropes, when the actuality is that anyone, also anyone listening, if you ever inspired anyone to only think of one new idea or open their worldview just the tiniest bit, you have had more effect, than all of these supposed superheroes on the screen that are only always, attracting the greatest evil so they can destroy it. Meanwhile, they destroy whole cities in the process and so on.
Right.
That's just, the Disneyfied idea of it. The actual thing is just as we're doing now, and I'm sure anyone listening is doing, inspiring yourself, inspiring each other. That is the real change, and that is the real heroic act, especially if it is in face of opposition, in face of fear, being authentic, speaking your truth.
I love it. I love it. Yes. I think that was done on purpose. That is alchemy. And the other thought that I just want to add on top of that is, as you think of a new thought and you've now added something to the universe and you've created something that now exists, isn't that really the whole idea of the universe is constantly expanding, right? I mean,
yes.
size wise or whatever, it all makes sense. Somehow everything makes sense. Talking to Raphael, he makes everything make sense, and then you're just more confused when you leave.
All right, my
You
brother.
here, just to leave on the positive note, or to put it back again, even here you can see this is also a Busharian term, but it's quite obvious, the confusion. You're fusing things together. So in the beginning it's disorienting, in the end again you realize it's all one, because it's only been ideas that previously have been separated within our own minds for good reason, and they coalesce back again into one, and then again it's just one, and then there's nothing even to argue about. So
Like a wave, it just keeps cycling. I love it. What a wonderful episode. Thank you so much, Raphael, again for coming down, and the Wiz. Always good to see you laugh so heartily and be happy in the discussion that's happening. I love that. Awesome. All right, I guess.
So Thursday, 4/20, one of my favorite days. New moon. I'll be reading at the Goddess Gathering here in Sebring. So any of my goddess friends, please come out and see me and say, hey, let's do it up. We'll do some magic that night.
Awesome.
So, Raphael, thanks, man. As always, from the bottom of my heart, and we'll reprise this in a couple weeks. Okay, man.
Absolutely.
thanks for
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. We appreciate and feel all of your energy. I definitely appreciate all the interaction tonight. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, to all my new friends out there, thanks so
Yeah.
much.
We'll see you
Appreciate
next week.
showing up.
Adios.